Hey folks, Derek the Old Jarhead here. Customers always ask me how many logs I can mill in a day, and I think the most I'd done prior to this particular job was about 20 logs. And the key really to, that answer, it's a really loaded question, how many logs you can mill in a day. Well, it depends. If they're 500 board foot logs, you're going to be getting maybe 7 or so in a day. But if they're smaller logs like these ones, they're 8.5 feet long and about 75, 76 board feet a log. Some of the keys to how many logs you can mill in a day are the size of the logs, what's the yield on each log, how long it takes to get each log done, how quickly the logs can be brought to the forks. Now, in this particular job, the customer had a skid steer, which worked great because he would have logs ready to go. And as soon as I was lowering the forks and the off bearers were pulling the last boards off the mill, he would start rolling in with the skid steer, and once I got the forks down either to the ground or very close to it, he would bring the log right in, roll it onto the forks, and I'd lift it up and away we'd go. So as you can see, this worked really well because I really didn't have to wait for logs. It was log after log after log. In 7 hours, we actually did 26 logs and milled over 1,900 board feet. That day, that first day, we were only milling at about 275 board feet an hour. I think maybe I calculated it 277 board feet an hour. But, there are a couple of things that go into that equation. One is the off bearers themselves, getting off bearers that are really quick to off bear the slabs and lumber from the mill, and having the logs ready to go so that as soon as the last boards are cut and I'm ready to unclamp and drop the forks and raise the side supports, the next log's coming in and getting loaded onto the forks and rolled up on the deck. And you can do that without a skid steer, but the key here is to have the off bearers, when they're not pulling slabs and lumber off the mill, to grab cant hooks and roll the next log in, getting it ready to go. And of course they got to keep it a little bit out of the way, but if they plan it right, they could still leave 3 or 4 feet to get past the forks. And as soon as the last boards come off the mill, that log gets loaded up, and it'll be a little bit slower than what we were doing here. I think the most I'd done prior to this trip was about 20 logs in one day, and that was without heavy equipment rolling the logs onto the mill forks. But you can still get a lot of logs rolled in fairly quickly, and that's really another key to higher production. You've got to have those logs ready to go right there, roll it onto the forks and get it up on the deck so the sawyer can start milling it down. I've done some videos on differences between hobby sawyers and YouTube sawyers, and it's not to take anything away from folks that mill up just 1 or 2 logs. It's really just to show the difference, and there are certainly times when all I'm doing is what I would call hobby sawing, or even YouTube sawing, where I just have a log and I talk about what I'm doing, or I'm just milling it up for myself, and of course that's going to take longer. But I wanted to show kind of what it looks like to be out on a job where you're truly producing. This is production sawing. You're just milling log after log after log, get them on the deck, mill them down, get them off the deck. This kind of milling is what I call production sawing or production milling. It's a different animal. I think that, if you watch videos on YouTube where the guy's milling up just a few boards out of a log, or they're milling up one log and they're spending time to talk about the log that they're milling and show you the grain patterns that they're getting. That's great because it shows you what you can do with one of these mills. But I think one of the things I really haven't seen out there is somebody who's really cranking out the lumber. And if you've got one of these mills and you're kind of curious, or maybe you're just getting one of them and you haven't been able to get out and really get familiar with it yet, this video, I think, kind of gives you a really good idea, as you watch log after log after log after log get milled up on the deck. And that's another thing about production sawing, is that you don't really have time to set up cameras and move them around and take different pictures and talk to the camera and explain what you're doing. It's because when you're production sawing, you just don't have time to do those kind of things. You're there, you're being paid to mill up as much quality lumber as you can in a short period of time. And so your focus is entirely on what you're doing. And in past videos, I've talked about some of those differences. And one of the things I've mentioned is economy of movement. And by that, I mean, you really don't want to be doing all kinds of different things in order to produce. You simply can't, messing around with a log or a cant a whole lot before you get it milled down all the way, or stopping during the process of milling the log, isn't going to get high production rates. High production rates come from non-stop producing. Again, when you're doing that, your focus has to be entirely on just that. Now, you'll notice some things in my videos. One of the things you'll notice is that once the head's back and I'm ready to move the log over, I move right over to the hydraulic controls. Now, granted, I'm actually using an LT40 hydraulic. It's not a super hydraulic. It doesn't have a remote control station or a stationary control. It's part of the head, so that when you bring that head back, you'll see that I tend to bring it back as far as I can, because then it's a quick hop over the tongue of the mill trailer to get over to the controls. We run the controls, get the log up on the deck, and then shift back over to the control head on the other side of the mill. And so you'll kind of see that each time I load a log, I'm actually over on what is the right side. The controls are on the left side. So I move over to that side, and it's really just step over the tongue, grab the controls, operate the controls, load the log up on the deck, and then move back over to the mill head control side and get going. It's really important to understand that in order to really produce, you've got to have consistency in what you're doing. And so you'll notice that I'm consistently moving from one side to the other on the mill, and I'm doing it very quickly. So I'm going from the control station, which I'm pulling all the way back, operating the hydraulics, and that gives me the opportunity to lift my hand up if I need to and raise the head or something like that, move something out of the way, and then get back to it. Now, another thing that I should mention is you don't want the head moving while you're operating the hydraulics. If you do, the ground strip on the mill main beam will actually get burn spots in it. You need to let the mill completely stop moving before you grab the hydraulics and start loading logs or using the log clamp or the log roller, etc. So it's awfully tempting to just hit the back switch and hop over and start running the controls while the mill head's still moving, but you really should not do that. It's actually bad for that ground strip. So you'll notice I bring the head all the way back, I hop over to the other side, operate the controls, get the log loaded up, and then move on. Now, one of the things you'll notice in these clips is that there's a couple things I have to do once in a while. One is occasionally I got to grab that cant hook that I keep right there at my hydraulics controls. That's a 32-inch log right mill deck cant hook, and I keep that there just so that if a log doesn't want to completely roll off the forks, I can grab that short cant hook, walk over to the log, roll it all the way, come back to the controls, set the cant hook down, and go back to it. The other thing you'll notice, especially on these short logs, when you're milling logs that are in that 8-foot, 8.5-foot range, if they're not placed exactly center on the loading forks, then when they roll up on the mill deck, they could actually roll past one of those side supports. Now, I think the hydraulic mills and a lot of the new ones have the center side supports connected to the hydraulics. And I know that's an option on the standard LT40. I did not get that option. So that means that if I have a log that's not going to roll directly onto the side supports, I've got to walk around, flip one up. One other thing you may have noticed that I've done in here and that I do all of the time is I make sure that those swing out bunks are not in the outward position, because if they are and a log rolls onto those swing out bunks, it'll actually impact the deck and eventually crater the deck a little bit. and then send that bunk support out of alignment. So before loading logs, you always want to move those swing out bunks out of the way, load the log, and then if you've got a big log, you know, a 16 footer or something bigger than that, then what you do is you lift it up with the rollers and swing those swing out bunks into place. That's just one of those things that you have to do. So for maximum production, you got to get the logs on the deck as quick as you can, and I hope you see that here. We're just rocking and rolling. As always, folks, if you like what you see, if you found it useful, you want to make sure that others see it, I'd really love it if you'd hit that like button for me. It really helps, and you can share these videos. Anytime someone shares one out there, more people get to see it, and I really appreciate that. So thanks for watching, everybody. The old Jarhead out.